Hi everyone, and welcome to the Stitch Pink 2024 sew along of my A Side of Hearts pattern. So glad you can join us and so excited to get started. So hopefully you've viewed the fabric requirements video that I put up. There's a link in the caption below if you haven't. So go and check that out. Just make sure that you've collected your fabrics and made some decisions about your fabrics, whether you're going I heart ombre metallics like I am, or perhaps another ombre like I did in my test version, or whether you're going from your scraps and you've just picked sort of 10 different colors or tones that you want to have going across your beautiful quilt. So look forward to seeing what everybody's fabric pools are going to be. In the email this week, you will have seen how to share your progress either on Instagram or Facebook with the hashtag, or joining our Facebook Quilting and Sew Along group. Love to see you in there sharing your progress and questions and thoughts, and also cheering along other people that are doing the sew along with us. So that will be fun too. Okay, time to get going. So first up is obviously working with our fabrics, and the very first thing, especially if you've gotten a pre-cut half yard bundle like I have, is pressing it, because these creases are very very pronounced, and it's surprising the hard crease, actually how much dimension it takes up. So I'm going to show you how to press your fabric, and I know that sounds a bit weird, but if you have got a pre-cut bundle like I have, the 18-inch width of our fabric is, we're going to use every absolute last millimeter of it. So when we're pressing, we need to be very careful that we're not distorting our fabric, because we're going to do width of fabric cuts and to that full width. So we've got to be a bit careful. So I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks on that. As I said in the requirements video, do not starch if you only have a half yard cut, because starching shrinks the fabric a little bit, and you need every little skerrick of it. So if you want to starch, then please do get cuts slightly larger. I've got the information about that in the pattern. But I can't wait to start getting on and pressing our fabric so that we can then get to our cutting. Actually, before we get to our cutting, let me just talk about in the pattern. I have some label sheets for you in the pattern, and that's to help you when we do start cutting in a minute to determine which fabrics are which placements they're going to be in, and all of those sort of things. The very first label you'll want to cut off here are the 1 to 10, which is determining the order of our 10 coloured fabric across our pattern. So number 1 and number 10, which is down the bottom. I don't even think you can see number 10 down here. Number 10 is way down here. The cute little pinky one in this one. You get to choose out of your half yards, half meters, where you want your colours to be. If you're a purple lover, you may want purple to be dead smack in the middle. Or if you are, goodness forbid, an orange lover, you may want orange dead smack in the middle. The colour that you choose for being in the middle has obviously the most blocks, because we're going diagonally. So if you do love your orange, you'll have the most of those, or purple, you'll have the most of those. So that's one of the decisions to start thinking about right now, which is, where do you want your colours to be? So perhaps put them on a design wall, or like I do, the design guest bed, and lay out just by popping the fabrics like this, just pop them in, sort of get them in a nice colour gradient that you like, that's pleasing to you, and then using the little labels, you can mark them 1 to 10 so that you can keep track of which one's going to be which. So let's get to some pressing. So let's come into my sewing space and my ironing station. Now, if you're curious about my ironing station, I've got a video all about how I made that from an Audi kitchen trolley. So I love it. It's nice and big, and I've got a cute woolen mat on it so that I can press larger things like our half yard piece from I Heart Ombre Metallic. So this is, as I said before, a pre-cut from a half yard bundle that Moda have cut. And so there's big, quite hard creases, certainly down the middle and across the middle as well. So I do need to press these out before I start cutting. But as I said, we need every skerrick of this 18 inches width. So I'm going to be very, very gentle. So I've got my Aliso Pro, and I actually don't put water in my irons because I never remember to take it out. So I just use a little spray bottle, and I'm just going to literally give it a tiny spritz and all the way down as well. And then it's a bit hard with camera because the camera's right in front of me, but I'm going to start in the middle, pressing that middle crease and pressing as in up, lift. I'm not ironing where I'm, going side to side and moving it drastically. Just a gentle press. I'm just going to press those two little side. They're not as hard. So that's it. I haven't skewed my fabric. I'm trying to keep it as straight as possible. So then I'm just going to move it up. And I love having my ironing station just away from the wall just a little bit so that I can let it drop over the back when I've pressed it. So again, just straightening that, making sure it's kind of straight, not skewing. And I've already given that little bit of a spritz of water. So I'm just going to come and get those creases out. So that's going to be enough to be able to do my cutting and make sure that the cuts that I make are going to be straight as well. So just that last little bit. Nice little bit out here. Salvage just in case there's any creases there. And that's it for my first piece. So I just have to do that for the other 9 colours in the half yard bundle, and then I'm going to give my my background a press as well. So now that we have our 10 coloured fabrics pressed nicely, no big hard creases, but we've kept things as square as possible and as straight as possible. Now is the time to really decide finally what order your fabrics are going to be across your pattern. And I've provided a colouring sheet for you so that you can have a bit of a play with some colouring and make some placements in terms of, fabric, 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 to get some colours ideas. Once you've decided, and by the way, this is going to be my layout, as much as I love purple, I also love pink. And I thought having a gradient from quite pale through to some more gorgeous colours in the middle through to the darker purples down the bottom was going to look the best. Here is what all this gorgeous fabric looks like. Let me just show you. So all the fabrics down here are not very dark, but there are much more solid colours down the bottom. You can see the pale apricot, the orange, the sort of pinky red, the reds, then getting into the different types of pinks, getting into sort of a deep berry, getting into some purple shades, mauve, and then that deep purple. So on the edges of the selvages, the colours are quite strong. And then as you move through to the center of the fabrics, quite a few of them, this peach almost becomes a very pale cream. These are very light. Some of the others are a little bit darker. So you can see there's going to be some awesome movement in terms of the fabric colors and tones that we're going to get in this pattern. So the next thing we need to do, now that we've decided that this is our order, is to use the little labels so that we can label our colors, because the next thing we're going to be doing is starting to cut these fabrics, and we don't want to get them mixed up because, as I said, the tones change in the fabric, so you might think that something that was this pink might be that pink down here. So labeling is a great idea, and I've given you these cute little labels so that you can keep everything track. So one thing to think about when you're cutting, if you follow the cutting layout and diagram and the direction of the cuts for the triangles, you can get with the ombre this gorgeous dark to light across the quilt as well. So for example, this sort of paler purple, sort of the mauve, the triangles go from dark to light, darker to lighter. This one flips and goes the sort of slightly darker at this side, lighter at that end. This one's darker at this side, lighter and darker and lighter. So the dark is sort of coming from the outside and getting lighter and lighter as it comes in. So if you are using the ombre fabric and you follow my cutting instructions and the direction of those triangles being cut, you can get that effect as well. And it looks beautiful when we've started cutting out the beautiful I Heart Ombre fabric. So can't wait to see what this is going to look like for you as well. I did say that the cut-in part of this pattern was the hardest bit, wasn't it? I mean, if you don't want to use the ombre fabric and you're just using your stash, then you don't need to be getting the dark and lights going across the quilt if you don't want to. So it's just an option. But if you do follow my cutting instructions and you are using the ombre, you will be able to, if you choose to put them in the correct spots, get that lovely shading gradient as well as the ombre colours going the other direction. So just a little bit of fun. Okay, so now we can get on to actually doing the cutting. And in the pattern, I've also given you some cutting diagrams so that it shows you exactly what to cut for each of your different numbers. So hence having these numbers is really handy for you. So cutting for colours 1 and 10 is exactly the same. So let's show you how to do the cutting. Now, as I said, I've got half yard cuts, and these are the ones to be the most careful because we need every little skerrick of fabric. And I'm going to be cutting fabric number 3 to show you today. So the way I do it is I use a really long ruler. This is a Creative Grids 6.5 inch ruler, and that allows me to do nice sort of big long cuts. And I've also got another Creative Grids ruler, which is also 6.5 inches. So that gets us the width that we need for our biggest cut. Now, down the bottom of the fabric, I'll try and scooch that up for you. I'm going to align my long ruler just with the selvage of the fabric. Now, not all fabric is going to have been rolled properly on the bolt, so this may not be the perfect be-all and end-all of where your ruler is going to end up, but it's a good place to start. So I'll just move that back down again. So once I've got my ruler in its first position, I can bring my second ruler in so that I can start getting a bit of a width feel. And then I'm going to move this smaller ruler up and down and just see that I can get my full width of the cut on this side and whether the fabric has skewed a little bit. Now, as you saw, I was being particularly careful with my pressing. I'm just going to go back and forward. So up the very top, just out of screen, the fabric is just pulling a little bit over there. So I'm just going to tweak that a little bit and then just check the rest. That's cool. So that's wide enough to do my first cut, but I need to double check that I'm going to be able to get my second cut over here. And if for some reason you just can't get the full width, make sure that your smaller cut is correct and skimp on the bigger cut. You'll just need to use a scant, very scant 1/4 inch when you're sewing with these pieces. But if I'm looking over here, this is pretty much spot on all the way up and down. So one last double check, make sure I didn't tweak anything. Okay, so I can do my cut. Now, cutting long pieces of fabric with a ruler, I do it in multiple pieces. So start down the bottom, flatten out my hand, do my first cut, and just kind of walk my hand up very gently and carefully so as to not move the ruler. And as you can see, I've got my cut. Now I'm just going to scoot it down and we'll do the last little bit. Now I'm going to line up this ruler where my cut was. Again, good place to start. And I'm going to come in and just make sure that I'm fine on both sides. Oops, other way. It's getting a little bit squishy right up that top. I'll just move it over a smidge and we're fine. So I can continue. My cut. So then I have my two pieces and we can go and do the cutting for each of those. I think the small cuts are fairly self-evident, so you can just follow those in the pattern. So the easiest way to get those cuts, as I said, with the exact diagonal that I've shown in my cutting diagram, is actually, once you've got your big cut done, is actually just to fold your fabric in half, line up the nice cut edge on your cutting mat, straight, and so then you're going to cut off the selvage and then cut your squares to the sizing and the pattern, and then when you go to do your diagonal cut, leave your fabric together so there'll be two pieces together, do your cut, and then you've got them the right way round to get this shading effect across the quilt. So that's the easiest way to do it. With just a subtle darker to lighter, and we'll be able to put them across the quilt to get that lovely darker to lighter. So once I've got all my pieces cut, I can then work out my exact placement. Now, as I said, I'm going to try and do the darker to lighter on the top, darker to lighter sort of on the bottom, and there's 3 of these, so it can either be darker to lighter or darker to lighter, either way. So I might do that way. So that's my hearts, and then the triangles for our HSTs. We're doing number 3, so number 3, the triangles are like this. So that's kind of darker to lighter. So that one's going to be my bottom one. That one's going to be my top one. And then these are just a little bit paler. And that's the darker to lighter. And that's the darker to lighter. So that's my 4 triangles for number 3. And again, I'm going to number them from the bottom to the top right rather than the other way around. So that's my middle heart. That's the one that's darker to lighter. That's the one down the bottom left. And this one's the one at the top. Very see. So that's my labelling done for number 3. So I can just put them all together. Get those triangles neatly. And what have I got left for number 3? Not a lot. A little bit from the middle. So that's going to go towards our scrappy binding as well as this. So I'm just going to kind of fold that up. I'm going to put my number 3 back on there just to keep it neat and tidy. So there I've got my spare fabric and my actual pieces. I'm going to go and put that away and start cutting on the next one. So now we just need to get cutting through all of the different numbers, 1 to 10, remembering that 1 and 10 is cut the same, 2 and 9, etc., etc. And with all the labelling, you too can end up with a big pile like this. It does look a little bit more daunting than it really is. Just take it nice and slow, follow the instructions, follow those cutting diagrams that I talked about. With fabrics 4 and 5, they're cut the same. They're just a little bit different than the others in that we're cutting out 2 of those big squares, as we have for 3s and 7s and etc. But you don't want to cut out a 3rd square to make your 1 triangle. We only need 1 triangle, so we're only going to cut 1 triangle. So you just need to do that measuring and just cutting the triangle, because the other part of that is used for one last heart rectangle. So I'm just going to show you quickly how to do that. Okay, for our 5 and 6 fabrics, we need to do just a slightly different thing. And instead of cutting out a big square, we need to cut out a big triangle. If you cut the square, then you haven't got enough fabric to make your last heart piece. So just once you get to the point where you've cut out the 2 squares and made the triangles from those, we need to then just measure up our last triangle. So measure out onto the longer side where your measurement is for our square, and we're going to then just cut from point A to point B. So from the mark that you've made on that side to your other corner, we're going to then cut. And this will give us our triangle the last triangle that we need. And then we just have to cut one of our last heart pieces, and just be wary of the direction that you're cutting this. There's quite a bit of space. You could cut it out that way, but the ombre, if you're using ombre fabric, the ombre will not be the same then as all of your other hearts. So cut it across the ombre, for want of a better word. And of course, the last thing, once we've got all of our 10 colours sorted, we need to be looking at our background fabrics. Now, I always cut the larger strips or pieces first. Basically, it's a bit of a cover my bottom. If you cut the larger ones and you make a little mistake, maybe it's a bit too small or something like that, you can still then use some of that fabric up for your smaller pieces. But if you've cut all your smaller pieces and then make a mistake on your larger piece, you're kind of stuffed because you've got not enough fabric left. So you'll either be going and finding more fabric or making do somehow. So I always start with my larger cuts. And also with the cutting instructions that I give you, some of those larger cuts, we don't need a full one of those last strips, so you can use part of those strips for some of the smaller pieces. So by the time you get to the smaller cuts, you've got less cuts to do. So that could be cool. I can't wait to start cutting up this beautiful fabric. So I think that's it for our cutting week. It is a lot of work, I realise that, and I apologise profusely, but it will be worth it once we get to start playing with all of these beautiful fabrics that are all nicely labelled now and ready to go for our sewing next week. So talk to you then.